In the heart of the galaxy, peace was offered with poisoned wine. The diplomats of Earth came in good faith, but the hegemony came with chains hidden in treaties. On the shining hulls of Nexus Prime, one human stood against the weight of an empire and chose to walk away. The galaxy didn't know it then, but the moment Earth withdrew was the moment everything began to unravel. The age of submission was ending, and humanity was done playing nice. The broken promise the diplomatic chamber aboard Nexus Prime Station hummed with tension. Ambassador Elena Vasquez adjusted her formal jacket and studied the 7 alien representatives seated across the curved table. Each being represented one of the major powers within the stellar hegemony, the governing body that had ruled this sector of the galaxy for over 4 centuries. Elena had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. Earth's admission to the hegemony was supposed to be humanity's greatest achievement, their ticket to becoming a respected member of galactic civilization. But as she looked at the contract displayed on her tablet, she felt her heart sink. These terms are completely different from what we agreed upon 6 months ago, Elena said, her voice steady despite the frustration building inside her. The original treaty granted Earth autonomous control over our colonies and trade agreements. High Arbiter Zilfak leaned forward, his silver skin gleaming under the chamber's lights. The hegemony's leader spoke with the authority of someone who had never been questioned. The Hegemony Council has reconsidered the terms. Your species requires proper guidance to avoid the mistakes that younger civilizations typically make. Captain Marcus Chun, Earth's military advisor, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had reviewed the new contract 3 times, and each reading made it worse. The hegemony wanted complete control over Earth's military, their technology development, and even their population growth. It was not membership they were offering. It was slavery with better packaging. Article 7 states that all human technological research must be approved by the Hegemony Science Council. Elena continued, scrolling through the document. Article 12 requires Earth to limit population growth to levels determined by hegemony demographers. Article 15 gives the hegemony the right to relocate human colonies as they see fit. The Caltherian representative, an insect-like being called Hive Speaker Vex, clicked his mandibles in what might have been amusement. All member species accept these reasonable restrictions. The hegemony has maintained peace and prosperity for 400 years precisely because we prevent the chaos that comes from uncontrolled expansion. Elena looked around the table at each alien face. She saw the same expression on all of them. The condescending patience of adults dealing with a stubborn child. These beings had grown so accustomed to submission that they could not imagine anyone refusing their demands. The Droken submitted to similar terms 60 years ago, added Counselor Vorth, a slug-like creature whose skin changed colors as he spoke. They now enjoy the protection and stability that comes with proper hegemony oversight. Marcus Chun had visited Droken worlds during his military service. He remembered the empty factories, the listless population, and the slow decay of a civilization that had been forced to stop growing. The Droken had not been protected by the hegemony. They had been neutered by it. What about our existing colonies? Elena asked. Humanity has established settlements on 12 worlds over the past 30 years. Our people have built lives there. Non-essential colonies will be consolidated. Zilfak replied with casual indifference. The hegemony will determine which settlements serve the greater good of galactic civilization. Your people will be relocated to more suitable worlds where they can contribute more effectively. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She thought about New Geneva, where her sister lived with her family. She thought about Harmony Station, where human engineers had built something beautiful from nothing. She thought about the frontier worlds where humans had learned to survive in impossible conditions, proving their worth through determination and ingenuity. And if we refuse these terms, she asked, the chamber fell silent. The 7 alien representatives exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from surprise to amusement. No species had ever refused hegemony membership. The benefits were too obvious, and the alternatives too frightening. Refusal is not a realistic option, Zilfak said finally. Independent civilizations face constant threats from raiders, resource shortages, and territorial disputes. The hegemony provides security, trade networks, and technological advancement. Without these benefits, your species would struggle to survive. Elena stood up slowly, her movement causing ripples of confusion among the alien delegation. She looked at each representative for several seconds, memorizing their faces. Then she picked up her tablet and deleted the contract with a single gesture. Ambassador Vasquez, Counselor Vorth said, his skin shifting to deep purple, surely you are not considering— I am considering exactly what you think I am considering, Elena interrupted. Earth rejects these terms. We reject membership in the hegemony under these conditions. We will find our own path forward. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Hive speaker Vex mandibles clicked rapidly in agitation. The synthetic delegate, a crystalline being called Prime Node 7, flickered with what might have been surprise. Even the normally composed Zilfak showed cracks in his diplomatic facade. This is impossible, the High Arbiter said, rising from his chair. No civilization has ever rejected hegemony protection. You cannot survive independently. You lack the resources, the technology, and the experience. Marcus Chun stood beside Elena, his hand resting on the handle of his ceremonial sword. We have survived ice ages, world wars, and the journey to the stars. We will survive this too. Without hegemony trade routes, your colonies will starve, Vorth protested. Without our defense networks, raiders will destroy your settlements. Without our technology sharing, you will fall behind every other civilization in the galaxy. Elena walked toward the chamber's exit, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. We built our civilization without your help. We reached the stars without your guidance. We will continue to grow without your permission. She paused at the doorway and turned back one final time. The hegemony offers security in exchange for freedom. That is not a bargain humanity will ever accept. We would rather face the challenges of independence than live as comfortable slaves. The doors slid shut behind the human delegation with a soft hiss. The 7 most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. In 4 centuries of expansion, the hegemony had never been rejected. Every species had eventually seen the wisdom of accepting their protection. They will be back, Zilfak said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. When they face the first crisis, when raiders attack their trade ships, when they realize they cannot survive alone, they will return and accept our terms. But even as he spoke, the High Arbiter felt a strange unease. There had been something in the human ambassador's eyes, something he had not seen in any other species. It was not fear or desperation or even anger. It was determination. Cold, implacable determination. 3 days later, Elena stood in the Oval Office of the Presidential Palace on Earth, facing Prime Minister Cale Thornton. The journey home had given her time to think about what came next. Earth was about to face the greatest challenge in human history, and they would face it alone. The hegemony will not make this easy for us, she reported to the assembled cabinet. They will try to isolate us economically, deny us access to their trade networks, and prevent other species from dealing with us independently. Thornton nodded grimly. He had been expecting this outcome ever since the preliminary negotiations had begun. The hegemony's terms had been getting worse with each revision, as if they were testing how much humanity would tolerate. What about our existing allies? Asked Defense Secretary Maria Santos. The Altarians seemed interested in maintaining relations. The Altarians are a hegemony client state, Elena replied. They will not risk their protected status by defying the Council. We need to assume that we are completely on our own. The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. Earth's population was 3 billion. They had 12 established colonies and a modest fleet of exploration and defense vessels. They would be facing a galactic government that controlled hundreds of worlds and commanded resources beyond imagination. So, what do we do? Thornton asked. Elena looked out the window, at the bustling city beyond. Humans moved through the streets with purpose and energy, building, creating, and solving problems with the same determination that had carried them from caves to starships. They had faced impossible odds before and found ways to overcome them. "We do what humans have always done," she said. "We adapt, we innovate, and we prove that freedom is worth more than security." The hegemony thinks they are offering us a choice between their protection and destruction. They are wrong. We are offering them a choice between accepting our independence and discovering what happens when you corner a species that refuses to give up. The meeting ended with the unanimous approval of the Independence Protocol. Earth would withdraw from all hegemony institutions, recall its diplomats, and prepare for whatever came next. They would face the galaxy alone, armed with nothing but their determination and the belief that some things were worth fighting for. Today, Elena walked through the corridors of the presidential palace. She thought about the shocked faces of the hegemony representatives. They had expected humanity to negotiate, to compromise, to eventually submit like every other species before them. They had not expected humans to simply walk away from the table. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 4 centuries by offering protection in exchange for submission. They had never encountered a species that valued freedom more than safety. They were about to learn that their greatest strength could also be their greatest weakness. The galaxy was about change, and it would change because one species had the courage to say no to the most powerful government in known space. The consequences would reshape the political structure of the galaxy forever. The ripple effect. 6 months after the failed negotiations, Dr. Sarah Kim stood on the observation deck of Armstrong Station and watched another refugee ship dock at the commercial port. The vessel was a converted cargo hauler, its hull scarred by hasty modifications and bearing the markings of 3 different species. Inside were families who had risked everything to reach human space. Earth's rejection of hegemony membership had created ripples that spread far beyond what anyone had anticipated. What the hegemony had intended as isolation had become something entirely different. Independent traders, dissatisfied colonies, and oppressed minorities throughout the galaxy had begun to see human space as a beacon of hope. "Dr. Kim, we have another communication from the Vega Collective," announced Lieutenant Torres from the communication console. "They are requesting permission to establish a trade depot in the Kepler system." Sarah nodded, making notes on her tablet. The Vega Collective was a group of mining worlds that had grown tired of hegemony taxation and regulation. They wanted to trade their rare minerals directly with human manufacturers, bypassing the hegemony's controlled markets entirely. In the 6 months since walking away from the negotiations, Earth had become the center of an unofficial network of independent worlds and free traders. What had started as isolation had evolved into something the hegemony had never expected: alternative economic and political structures. The communication panel chimed again. "Dr. Kim, incoming message from New Geneva Colony. They report that 17 more families have arrived from the Proxima Sector. They are requesting refugee status and asylum from hegemony conscription." Sarah frowned. The Proxima Sector was deep in hegemony space, and its residents were supposed to be loyal citizens. The fact that they were fleeing to human territory suggested that cracks were forming in the hegemony's perfect order. That on Earth, Prime Minister Thornton reviewed the latest intelligence reports with growing amazement. The hegemony's attempts to isolate humanity had backfired spectacularly. Instead of forcing Earth to submit, the isolation had revealed something that nobody had realized. The hegemony's control was far more fragile than anyone had imagined. "The hegemony is facing rebellion on 14 worlds," reported Intelligence Director Collins. "The Drokin have stopped sending tribute shipments. The Altarians are demanding renegotiation of their client status. 3 minor species have declared independence and are requesting protection from Earth." General Torres, who had been appointed to coordinate humanity's defense efforts, studied the star charts with professional interest. The hegemony's military is impressive on paper, but it has not faced a real challenge in decades. Their forces are spread thin across hundreds of worlds, and their client species are no longer reliable. The most surprising development was the flood of technological innovation that had emerged from human isolation. Without access to hegemony technology, human scientists had been forced to develop their own solutions to complex problems. The results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Dr. Kim had led a team that developed a new type of faster-than-light drive that was both more efficient and more affordable than anything that Gemini used. Human engineers had created manufacturing techniques that could produce goods at a fraction of the cost of hegemony factories. Agricultural specialists had developed methods for growing food in hostile environments that transformed marginal colonies into thriving settlements. The refugees bring more than just population, Sarah explained to a gathering of colonial administrators. They bring knowledge, skills, and perspectives that we would never have gained otherwise. The Valyrian engineers who arrived last month have taught us metalworking techniques that have revolutionized our ship construction. The contrast between human space and hegemony territory was becoming stark. While hegemony worlds struggled with bureaucratic inefficiency and stagnating technology, the independent worlds were experiencing rapid growth and innovation. Trade flowed freely between human colonies and their new partners, creating prosperity that had been impossible under hegemony restrictions. Captain Chun, now promoted to admiral, stood on the bridge of the new battleship Defiance and watched the construction of 3 more vessels in the orbital shipyards. The hegemony had expected human industry to collapse without their support. Instead, it had flourished beyond all previous achievements. Admiral, we have a priority message from Earth Command, reported Commander Walsh, the ship's communication officer. Hegemony forces are massing near the Centauri border. Intelligence suggests they are preparing for military action. Chin nodded grimly. The hegemony's peaceful isolation strategy had failed, and they were running out of options. The rebellion spreading through their territory was threatening the foundation of their power. Something would have to be done to restore order, and humanity was the obvious target. Alert all fleet commanders, Chin ordered. We knew this day would come. The hegemony cannot allow our success to continue because it proves their system is not necessary. They will try to destroy us to preserve their authority. The message was transmitted to every human world and allied settlement. The time for diplomacy was over. The hegemony was preparing for war, and humanity would have to defend not just their own freedom, but the freedom of every species that had chosen to join them. On the industrial world of New Pittsburgh, factories that had been producing civilian goods began converting to military production. The mining colonies increased their output of strategic materials. The research stations focused their efforts on defensive technologies. Humanity was preparing for the greatest challenge in their history, but they were not preparing alone. The Vega Collective pledged their mining output to the human war effort. The Altarian rebels offered to sabotage hegemony supply lines. The Droken promised to share intelligence about hegemony military capabilities. The network of independent worlds that had formed around humanity was becoming something unprecedented in galactic history, a voluntary alliance based on mutual benefit rather than forced submission. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, now serving as Earth's Minister of Foreign Affairs, met with representatives from 43 independent worlds at a conference on Harmony Station. The gathering would have been impossible under hegemony rule, where different species were kept separate and dependent on central authority. We stand at a crossroads, Elena told the assembled delegates. The hegemony offers the galaxy a choice between their control and chaos. We offer a third option. Cooperation without domination, security without submission, and prosperity without dependence. The delegates nodded in agreement. They had seen what was possible when species worked together freely. They had experienced the innovation and growth that came from unrestricted trade and open communication. They had no desire to return to the stagnation of hegemony rule. As the conference concluded, Elena received a priority communication from Earth. High Arbiter Zilthak was requesting a meeting to discuss the current crisis. It was the first official contact between Earth and the hegemony since the failed negotiations. He wants to negotiate, Elena reported to Prime Minister Thornton. The hegemony is finally realizing that their isolation strategy has failed. They are ready to discuss terms. Thornton smiled grimly. What terms could they possibly offer now? They have lost half their client species, their economy is in chaos, and their military is stretched to the breaking point. They are the ones who need our help, not the other way around. The irony was not lost on anyone involved. The hegemony had offered Earth membership in exchange for submission, confident that humanity would eventually accept their terms. Instead, Earth had created something that the hegemony had never imagined, a viable alternative to their rule. The meeting was scheduled for the next week, but Elena already knew what her response would be. Earth would not return to the negotiating table as a supplicant seeking admission to the hegemony. They would arrive as the leader of a new galactic order, one based on freedom and cooperation rather than control and submission. The galaxy was about to learn that the most powerful force in the universe was not the threat of destruction, but the promise of something better. Humanity had walked away from the hegemony's offer because they believed in that promise. Now, they were going to prove that their faith was justified. The new dawn, the second round of negotiations, took place aboard the neutral station Meridian, located in the buffer zone between human space and hegemony territory. But this time, the dynamics were completely different. High Arbiter Zilfak arrived with a delegation of 7, just as before, but their confidence had been replaced by barely concealed desperation. Ambassador Elena Vasquez entered the chamber accompanied by representatives from the Free Worlds Coalition, the name adopted by the growing alliance of independent systems. The human delegation was no longer isolated. They spoke for 47 worlds that had chosen cooperation over subjugation. The hegemony appreciates your willingness to resume discussions. Zilfak began, his silver skin dull with stress. The current situation in the galaxy requires immediate attention. The stability that has preserved peace for 4 centuries is being threatened by dangerous elements. Elena leaned back in her chair, studying the alien leader with interest. You mean the stability that comes from forcing species to surrender their autonomy in exchange for protection? That kind of stability is not peace, High Arbiter. It is merely the absence of hope. The Caltherian representative, Hive Speaker Vex, clicked his mandibles in agitation. The rebellion spreading through our territory is causing suffering and chaos. Worlds that have enjoyed hegemony protection for generations are destroying themselves with reckless independence movements. Or perhaps, interjected Elder Quintar, the Droken representative to the coalition, they are finally remembering what it means to be free. My people have rediscovered their creativity and ambition in the months since we stopped paying tribute to the hegemony. Our productivity has increased by 300%. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Every world that had left the hegemony had experienced rapid economic growth and technological advancement. The Free Worlds Coalition was not just surviving without hegemony protection. They were thriving beyond anything the old system had ever achieved. Admiral Rachel Stone, Earth's new fleet commander, presented the military analysis. Your forces are spread across hundreds of worlds, trying to suppress rebellions and maintain order through fear. Our forces are concentrated and supported by populations that believe in what they are fighting for. The mathematics are not in your favor. Zilfak's composure finally cracked. What do you want from us? The hegemony has maintained order in this galaxy for 4 centuries. We have prevented wars, facilitated trade, and protected weaker species from exploitation. Are you determined to destroy everything we have built? Elena stood up and walked to the chamber's large window, looking out at the stars beyond. We do not want to destroy anything, High Arbiter. We want to build something better. The hegemony's version of order requires the subjugation of free will. Our version of order celebrates it. She turned back to face the alien delegation. The coalition offers the hegemony a choice. You can continue trying to maintain control through force, watching your empire crumble as more worlds choose freedom. Or you can join us in creating a new galactic order based on voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit. The terms Elena presented were not negotiable. The hegemony would have to grant full independence to any world that requested it. They would have to abandon their client state system and their restrictions on technological development. They would have to transform from a controlling empire into a voluntary association of equals. This is impossible, Councillor Vorth protested, his skin shifting through angry colors. Without central authority, the galaxy will descend into chaos. Species will fight over resources, territory, and trade routes. The peace we have maintained will be shattered. The peace you maintained was built on the suppression of ambition and the stagnation of progress, replied Dr. Sarah Kim, now serving as the Coalition's science minister. Real peace comes from cooperation, not control. When species work together freely, they achieve more than they ever could under forced unity. The negotiations continued for 3 days, but the outcome was inevitable. The hegemony's power was breaking down faster than they could contain it. Rebellions had spread to over 30 worlds, and their military was no longer large enough to suppress them all. The economic disruption caused by the loss of client species had triggered a financial crisis that threatened the core worlds themselves. That on the final day, Zilfak made a last desperate offer. The hegemony is prepared to grant Earth and its allies special autonomous status within our structure. You would have the freedom you desire while still benefiting from our protection and trade networks. Elena shook her head. You still do not understand. We are not seeking special treatment within your system. We are offering you the chance to join our system. The Age of Empires is ending, High Arbiter. The Age of Cooperation is beginning. The breakthrough came when Prime Node 7, the synthetic representative, spoke for the first time during the negotiations. The hegemony system is inefficient and unsustainable. Analysis indicates that the coalition model produces superior outcomes in all measured categories. Logic suggests adaptation rather than resistance. Within hours, the synthetic worlds had declared their independence and requested coalition membership. The technological advantages they brought with them tipped the balance decisively. The hegemony's military found itself facing opponents who were not only more motivated but also better equipped. The final collapse came not through conquest, but through voluntary dissolution. One by one, the core worlds of the hegemony voted to leave the old system and join the coalition. The client species that had been held in subjugation for centuries were finally free to make their own choices. Zilfak stood in his empty palace on the former hegemony capital world, watching the last of his officials depart. The silver towers that had once symbolized eternal authority now stood as monuments to the failure of forced unity. He had been given the opportunity to lead his people into the new order, but pride had prevented him from accepting the reality of change. 6 months later, Elena stood on the observation deck of Coalition Station, the new center of galactic government. The structure was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built by dozens of species working together to create something that represented all of them. Unlike the imposing fortresses of the old hegemony, it was designed to welcome visitors and celebrate diversity. The hegemony worlds are adapting well to independence, reported Minister Kim during the weekly cabinet meeting. Productivity is up across the board, and innovation is accelerating. The transition has been smoother than anyone predicted. The success of the coalition had exceeded everyone's expectations. Without the restrictions of the old system, species were free to pursue their natural talents and interests. The Altarians had become master terraformers, transforming barren worlds into garden paradises. The Droken had emerged as brilliant architects, designing cities that celebrated beauty as well as function. The Valyrians had developed new manufacturing techniques that made complex products affordable for everyone. Trade flowed freely between worlds, carrying not just goods but ideas, cultures, and innovations. The galaxy had become a place of endless possibility, where cooperation and competition coexisted in healthy balance. The fear and stagnation of the old order had been replaced by optimism and growth. We receive dozens of applications for membership every week, Elena reported to the Coalition Council. Species from the Outer Rim, independent colonies, and even some from other galaxies have heard about what we have achieved. They want to be part of something that celebrates freedom rather than restricting it. The council chamber was filled with representatives from over 200 worlds, each bringing their unique perspective to the discussions. Decisions were made through debate and consensus rather than decree, and the process was often messy and complicated, but it was also vibrant and alive in a way that the old hegemony had never been. Admiral Stone provided the security report, though her tone was more optimistic than it had been in years. Piracy has decreased by 90% since the coalition was established. When species cooperate voluntarily, they defend each other naturally. The old system required constant military presence to maintain order. Our system creates order through mutual benefit. The transformation had not been without challenges. Some worlds had struggled with the transition to independence, and there had been conflicts over trade routes and resources. But these problems were solved through negotiation and cooperation rather than force and domination. As the meeting concluded, Elena walked to her private office and sat down at her desk. On the wall was a photo of the moment when she had walked away from the hegemony negotiations. It seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than 2 years. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Minister, there is a message for you from Earth. Prime Minister Thornton wants to know if you would be interested in returning home for a special assignment." Elena smiled. Earth was preparing to launch the first deep space exploration mission since the formation of the coalition. They wanted her to lead a diplomatic team that would make contact with civilizations beyond the known galaxy, carrying the message of freedom and cooperation to new worlds. "Tell the Prime Minister that I would be honored to serve," she replied. "But first, I want to finish something here." She opened her computer and began typing a message to the Coalition archives. Future generations would want to know how the galaxy had changed, how a single species had walked away from the most powerful empire in known space and created something better in its place. The story began with a simple truth. Freedom was not something that could be granted by others. It was something that had to be claimed by those who valued it more than safety, more than comfort, and more than the approval of those in power. Humanity had walked away from the hegemony not because they were strong enough to stand alone, but because they believed in something worth standing for. That belief had transformed not just their own fate, but the fate of the entire galaxy. The age of empires was over. The age of cooperation had begun, and it had started with 2 simple words: "We're done." The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what humanity had hoped to achieve. They had proven that the most powerful force in the universe was not the threat of destruction, but the promise of something better. The coalition was that promise made real, and it would continue to grow and evolve for generations to come. As Elena finished her report, she looked out at the stars and smiled. Somewhere out there, other species were facing their own versions of the choice that humanity had made. The message of the coalition would reach them eventually, carried by traders, explorers, and refugees who had seen what was possible when freedom was valued more than security. The galaxy was vast and full of possibilities, and humanity had helped to unlock them all. The future belonged to those who were brave enough to walk away from the old order and create something new. The coalition was proof that sometimes the greatest victory came not from conquest, but from the courage to say no to those who demanded submission. The stars were calling, and the galaxy was ready to answer.